Hey guys, welcome to Consult ROI podcast. We love to have each and every one of you back here again. So today's topic kind of came after some solemn news. I had a friend actually that unfortunately after a fairly long career was just told that he was not welcome any longer at his job, and that he had built up a massive career. He was making actually really good money, probably $250,000 a year. And he's now having to go on a crazy job search right now. And luckily, he had a little bit of savings to give him some time, but it's not giving him much time, just because of, again, he had all the medical schooling and everything else that racked up quite a massive amount of debt. So he had just barely started getting some of that paid off when this all happened. And so, as we all know, life is constantly a journey of highs and lows, and there is times that we face very undesirable circumstances, and kind of how we emerge on the other side of them is really determines kind of who our character is and how we come out on the other side. And I wanted to talk about it because it's very similar to my journey on how I actually ended up, again, going into entrepreneurship myself, because I was tired of other people's actions being the determination on whether or not I had a job. And I wanted to be judged on my own character and my own skills and ability to determine whether or not I was able to do that and determine what I was worth, as opposed to someone else, again, dictating what I was worth hourly to them. So the only, like, basically win or fail, I could only point the finger at myself from that point on. So I wanted to kind of go into, again, the topic of what to do when you get kicked in the gonads and get humbled really quickly through life challenges, relationship issues, whatever it may be. When it usually rains, it pours. So I already know that, unfortunately for him, he's probably going to have other challenges that arise that kind of snowballs out of this occurring for him. And it is difficult, but again, this is something that can make you a lot stronger. It's something that you can gain a lot out of, and you can grow substantially from this and have it be the pivotal. It'll be not the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new one.
Yeah.
Any trial, any great new beginning, anything usually begins at the end of something that needed to die in the first place. So anytime you have struggles in your life, anytime you are faced with these challenges, I want you to look at it with that perspective, that it wasn't something like your life isn't over, things aren't at an end. It's simply a new beginning for you and the life that you only dreamt was possible. All right. Anything you can add to that, Danny, before we kind of?
Absolutely. Like, there's a few things that my mind kind of starts racing. It's like, yeah, it absolutely, is undesirable, of a position to be in. But the fact is, it could happen to anybody, and it happens, quite frequently. So a couple of thoughts to come to mind there is that, also watching a friend who went through this a while back, and he really kind of came out of it going, you know what? I was leaning too much of my value was in my title. And it was a great life lesson to him to not allow his title to dictate the value of his life. Kind of as you mentioned, and what someone's willing to pay you per hour to define what you're worth, so to speak. And so he leaned so much into that title. And then when that title was removed, he found himself figuring out, wow, what is my identity? Like, who am I? What am I? What is my worth and all that stuff? Another thought that kind of comes to mind too is that podcaster Jordan Harbinger, he always says that you want to dig the well before you're thirsty. And it's not like, you want to like go all in on something, but then also still like plan on it, going away anytime soon. Nobody wants that. But to maybe, always kind of like plant the seeds and expand your network and things like that along the way so that you can do that. And as a follow-up to that, I would say, when this does happen, not if it happens, but when it does happen, because it's going to happen to anybody along the way. It might be a small thing, it might be a big thing, it might be, you know, your main income or the side or whatever it is. But when that does happen, is to not beat yourself up and not forget about the value that you brought to the table in the role that you were in or the people that you served. And so it's important to kind of peel the layers back of what that value was. So if you do have to go to a new industry, if you do have to start all over, just like you said, you're not starting over from scratch. You're starting over, like someone once said it, you're starting over from experience.
Absolutely. So you are starting from experience, but say, for instance, you made a lot of bad calls. Maybe you getting fired was absolutely your fault. Maybe the demise of your relationship was absolutely your fault. Maybe, right? There was
that way. Come on.
I know, but that's a harsh reality that you sometimes have to face. It's easy to point the finger at everybody else and blame them. Even in my circumstances, it was very easy to frankly blame them for a lot of it, and their lack of compassion for my brother dying at the time and everything, and their lack of compassion for a lot of things. But at the end of the day, I chose not to tolerate it. I chose to quit at that time. I chose to let my pride do that and to take things personally, which I had every right to. I'm not saying that I didn't, but there needs to also be the personal accountability there, that it was that moment that I chose, for better or worse. And it definitely could have probably was worse. There was going back, I may have done things a little bit differently, but knowing also my personality, I always am 100% in, or I'm 100% out. I don't do middle grounds. And if it's even a question, if I have to toilet in my mind, be like, hey, I don't know if I should, maybe I'm a little concerned about this. That's usually a pretty resonating no for me at that time. That means that there's a reservation. There's something like a red flag that's raised up on that in my head that says there's something not right about this. And so I've learned to listen to that personally, to where it's like, hey, that's not worth my time. I don't know what it is, but I'm not going to entertain this. I'm not going to engage with it, so forth. So with that said, though, I'm going to go at this as if you literally had to start from ground zero. As Danny said here, you do start over from experience, meaning that you do have the experience and even your mistakes that you can now reflect back on as a learning path to say, hey, what did I do wrong? What can I do better? What was actually the lesson that I needed to learn from this on how to grow? It doesn't mean that, and you can very easily learn the wrong lesson. You can very easily twist and misconstrue something. It goes back to our earlier topic where your inner voice is not your friend. It always is looking for excuses, for brain tells, for reasons, and that where everybody else again is at fault, that you are not at fault, and you will kind of wall off. So I can even now reflect on a lot of the jobs that I had and be like, okay, coming from this perspective, I even learned, okay, this was their management style. This is what happened. This is how it made me feel at that time. And this is why I want to learn the lesson out of this is, in order to avoid that feeling, I need to do this in my company that I manage, and that to avoid that toxic culture. Or I need to do this to gain this out of that. Or, hey, I didn't like this, so this is how I'm going to do things differently. And how, like, hey, like I know that when I was treated this way, I didn't perform well in my job, or I didn't act well or the way I should have, or I didn't work as hard as I knew I could have. I probably half-assed some things because I stopped caring at a certain point, especially if it was a job that I frankly hated, right?
Yeah, I mean,
so what can I do to instill those lessons and avoid that with my staff, with my employees moving forward, is a vital lesson. These are all lessons that you can learn. What's a lesson for you, Danny, that you kind of learned from some of your past jobs or experiences and that's really helped you moving forward and when you've had to start over?
Yeah, good question there. One is that life is too short to be miserable. And so, I mean, it may be you calling the shots of enough is enough. If you have a bad manager, a bad leader, to me, it's not worth working for them because it impacts the rest of your life. Now, I'm not just going to go out and quit the job and be like, oh, I hate this, I'm out of here, without a plan B, right? And so if you do find yourself in a job, I always say it's always easier to find another job while you still have a job, because your internal morale is a lot higher. You know that you've got value. And when that is stripped away and then you're clawing at things, you start to second guess. You have that.
Yeah.
Like
and even for him right now, this is something he's going through right now as well. Sorry, not to interrupt, but this is something that for him, he's struggling. He's looking at taking a pay cut that's half of what he was making,
right.
just to try to make ends meet and everything. And he's literally been looking at almost every single state, any job. And granted, he was pretty high up in his career. So there's only a limited amount of those type of positions available in the United States. So you kind of have to go wherever you're needed. And that can be very difficult. And so because of that desperateness and the undesire to want to uproot your family and everything, it kind of creates, again, that desperateness that puts you in probably a more undesirable situation than if you had just hedged your bets. But again, this is something that you can't always foresee, and sometimes hindsight is always 20/20. We can always look at what we would have, could have, should have done, but we didn't. We can now learn from it and we say, hey, okay, here's what I can do to try to avoid that moving forward. But at the same time, too, in a relationship, if you always are like, if you've come from a lot of relationships where there was a lot of mistrust line or whatever, you treat every single person that way or with that mindset that everybody's like that, it's already starting any new relationship on a bad foot. It's the same thing with your career. If you come from that trauma and that where you don't go all in on your current career, it can very much do that. But this is, again, why I started my own company, because I was literally getting paid to learn these lessons the hard way, for better or worse. There's definitely sometimes I've lost clients on that because there was a lesson I hadn't learned yet. There's improvements I needed to make to get to there. But at the end of the day, I've had to come to a realization every single time I think, oh, I'm failing, this is ridiculous. It'd be easier just to collect a paycheck and have other people deal with this stress. It's not really worth it. But I know there's like, okay, well, that's my voice talking to me. And every business owner does this. If they don't, then they're lying, or they've just never really gone through a downward economy in business ever.
I think that's the important takeaway there, is that it's not I don't know if I'd call it a naiveness or whatever, but it's like, it's acknowledging whether there's a mistake made or whatever, but extracting the lesson. I think that's the biggest key there, is extracting the lesson. Is just as you mentioned, if I'm not going to have that in my future culture, I didn't appreciate the way I felt when I was doing this, or when they treated me this way. Note to self, when doing this, don't do that.
But yeah, you will actually manifest your own future and everything. For example, if you think that everybody in your workplace is dishonest, has no integrity or anything else, you will usually create situations that allow for that to happen or manifest itself. So you will actually find more of that. So it's the same thing as, like, it's not saying that you are responsible for everybody else lying to you or doing everything else, but it's the same thing with mold. If you have a very humid house with dampness, you don't keep things clean or anything else, you can't blame mold for growing. Like, you created the environment where mold thrived. So if you don't want mold, don't have an environment that is conducive for growing mold.
No, that's a great analogy, good example there. So, and then it's also, not allowing that to be in, and then nipping that, if it does start to creep in, so that people know you hold yourself to a higher standard. It's unrelated but related. But a couple of weeks ago, I went to a Silicon Slopes event, and they talked about an organization that is kind of like Underground Railroad, but helping rescue kids and things like that. And one of the things that question kind of came up of, how do you deal with narcissistic type of people and things like that, or people that are more or less kind of like predators and things. He said, it's fortunate but unfortunate. He goes, when you call them out on that behavior, it's an uncomfortable conversation, but the blessing in it is usually when they're called out, they will turn away from the person that called them out in their environment, and they'll take it somewhere else. So in essence, you have helped save, the environment, the culture, the mold from growing in an area, and letting that negative energy and everything else, let it go somewhere else away from you. And so I think that's the important thing too, is to have crucial conversations, sometimes difficult conversations, uncomfortable conversations. But as you do, everybody's going to rise together, and they're going to know the higher level of standard of excellence that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And that's called healthy boundaries. So it's just maintaining that respect for yourself, and it's very easy to want to welcome a lot of things that brought a lot of negative things back into your life. But at the end of the day, when you start and hit rock bottom, this is the moment you get to choose what you want to have in your life and what you're willing to sell for. For whatever your life is what you are willing to settle for at that time. And sometimes it is getting a reality check and realizing that you're not worth what you think you are, and you need to get that piece of humble pie and work yourself up to that level and be like, hey, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do to strive this, because this is the life I want. It doesn't matter if that means, hey, I want to have a private plane. I want to be able to travel the world and do whatever I want anytime. I want to be able to pay for everybody's meal in the restaurant without blinking an eye or even stressing about it. I want to be able to do all these great charities, these events, or whatever it may be, whether financially, morally, whatever your goal may be, the sky's the limit. But create that roadmap, that mind map that we've talked about in previous episodes, where you will go through and say, this is the life, this is the picture board or vision board, right? Of the life I want. What do I need to do to accomplish that? And then break it down into milestones, and that's where you're like, break it down literally till you're like, okay, well, this is a task I can get done this week.
Yeah.
And as soon as you can get it down to where it is in steps where you can do on a weekly basis, that's when you can kill it. That is now when you can clearly see a vision to say, this is accomplishable. This is something I can achieve. And that's when you have that hope, you have that satisfaction and everything else. And that is really the biggest pillar in your success when you first are getting going, or you hit that rock bottom, is building that first pillar, that first layer of foundation, and getting that game plan to where you know what you need to build next.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? You start building the roof before you even pour the foundation, the cement, you're doing things wrong, right? And that roof's just going to sit on the ground, and then you've got to create a lot more work to hoist that back up onto the building after you built it, right? And it might not even fit the building because you did it out of order, right? So get the game plan first, then start building in the correct order to make your life a lot easier.
Exactly. It's like basically kind of following a pattern or a recipe for success. If you break that down, it's kind of like, a lot of people ask in different groups, what's the best CRM out there? What client relationship management system should I use? And the bottom line is the one that you use. That's my opinion, is the one that you use that works. The reason I mention that is that if you have a system down and you use it, when today rolls around, what am I going to do on Tuesday? Well, I do X, Y, Z. Looks like I've got 5 customers on the list. They each have a need, or they need a call, an email, or whatever. There's my follow-up. You check that box, it moves on. You set that date out. Now you only have 4 tasks. Same thing.
I mean, I can't even tell you how many people don't even do that. because they're like, well, I don't want to start and invest into a software or a system if it's not going to work for me long term. But I'm like, hey, as long as it has an exportable database, and then at least, yes, exactly. Because at least now you're collecting records, you're at least creating a foundation. And if you need to change that foundation, if you need to alter it a little bit, or if you need to adapt it, because you're like, okay, I'm getting to this point and I'm consistently seeing that this headache keeps causing problems. It doesn't mean that it happened once and then you magically try to overhaul everything because of that one incident. That's a very foolish mentality, and it means that you're going to constantly be renovating and you'll never gain traction. It also means that you are going to have very like a struggle gaining any level of progress in the build. It's like ripping the entire house down every 2 seconds to renovate and rebuild. It's stupid and foolish.
Just you got to get started and do it. And that's the thing that I admire most about people. Like, we all see people online that are like, I could do what they're doing. I could do that. They're not even like doing that much, but the bottom line is they're doing it. And I think that's the takeaway right here, is that taking action. So just like you said, mapping that out. What am I going to accomplish this week? Okay, maybe that's too soon. What am I going to do this month? All right. And so if you kind of like map that out, you have a system to follow and something to work towards.
Yeah, literally right now, it doesn't matter what your career, what your background is. You could be successful regardless of what your background is, regardless what trauma you went through, regardless of how bad your reputation, how bad your criminal record is, whatever excuse you want to give yourself. All that aside, it does not matter. You could have a successful plumbing business. You could have a successful consulting business. You could have successful whatever in company, and regardless in any field, if you're willing to take actionable steps towards that vision or game plan. And also taking accountability, being like, hey, you know what? I screwed up. I made these mistakes. I did this wrong. Here's what I'm going to do better. And then holding yourself accountable for when you screw up or feel yourself going back down the path that you know you shouldn't in the first place. This is the step where you take full, like you get naked in front of the mirror and realize, hey, you know, all those times that I didn't go to the gym and everything, I can see it now. Like, this is what I'm dealing with. And you can't deny it. You could looking at yourself in the mirror and realizing, hey, I've had all these junk foods, all these excuses, all these things. I have no excuses at this point. I can't deny that my actions directly result in what you have. That, again, this is in your life, your business, your body, your relationships, everything else. Whatever's manifesting itself is what you've both settled for, what you're willing to accept, and your lack of action or a lack of self-control.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the real truth right there. I mean, that's the real truth right there. And if you're satisfied with it,
if you don't want the body and everything, great. Hey, great. You can have, like, there's plenty of very, very fat millionaires or billionaires. Like, no problem with that at all. You can achieve that. I'm just telling you, it's not a great level of life. I know a lot of guys that are extremely talented, brilliant people in that, but they struggle extremely hard with their health. That is their challenge, but they're very good. They're very wealthy, everything else, but they're happy with that, and it's fine. Usually they get to a point where it starts inhibiting their quality of life, where they can't do cruises. They have to pay for multiple seats on an airplane type deal. And that's what that kind of some of their wake up call. Be like, hey, okay, I've neglected this for too long. I have the career, I have everything else. Now I want to focus on that. And sometimes it's the opposite. Some people, they have the six pack, they have everything else, but they don't have any personality. They don't have any business skills. They don't have anything else. And so they have to work on that. But whatever your goal is and wherever you're at, you can start, right? And it's okay to not have everything from the get-go, but take inventory of what you have and where you want to go, and then say, okay, great. Once I achieve this, I will accomplish this. And it's very hard to be really good at everything, right? If you are focused on one thing, chances are other things are going to suffer. Like if I go 120% in on my company and I grew it to its full potential and I dove that in, I would hate to say this, but I would be an absolute dirtbag of a father. Like I would just be a despicable human being in my eyes. Now, could I do that and then rebuild the relationship later? Sure. But is that a compromise I'm willing to take? No, it's
And what
not.
your kid's going to remember, throughout that process, right?
Yeah.
They remember. And so that's the thing. Like a lot of times I'll use examples and trainings and stuff like that. Your kids are out there on the basketball court. All they want to do is they just want to see that mom and dads don't have their heads down on their phone, that they just saw them. That's the
they actually paid attention. They care.
Right? And sometimes that's all you need as an individual, is just kind of like that reassurance. And so author Kim Perrell, she talks about having a highlight reel. So if you're going through a lot of these things right here, I would take some time today and write down the highlight reel. What was one of the biggest, maybe like your top 5 wins in your role that you really excelled at? And maybe dissect those. What went well? What relationships were there? How long was that sales cycle or that process that got you to that big win that was like so fulfilling that you're like, that was one of the highlights of that role? And what could you do to like replicate that? Or what were some of the components of that? And if you don't have that because it was like a team that was there that's no longer part of your life anymore, what can you do to go and build that, work on those skills just like you're talking about, or replicate some of those things that you might need additional training and work on when you've got other things that you excel at?
Absolutely. So the other portion is it doesn't, this goes back to, again, the same topic that we've talked about time and time again. It's not about quantity a lot of the time, it's about quality.
Yeah.
So if you can have a successful family, career, and everything else, is it is successful? Like, for example, you can have a multi-million-dollar company. You could have, if you 100% focused on it, if you did everything else, neglected your family, neglected your relationship, neglected all these things, you could have probably doubled that, right? But it doesn't matter if you're miserable and you hate life at the end of it.
Yeah.
And so that difference of, another 10, 20 million, it may seem like a lot, but at the end of the day, it's very minuscule in relation to your overall happiness and satisfaction, because you still could be making a killer living. You could still make good, comfortable living and do just fine. The problem comes when you try to be master of everything all at the same time and you don't know how to set proper boundaries. So if I'm with my kids, I know that I need 100% focus on the kids, and take that quality time with them. And I need to put aside my phone and just establish that boundary, even with my clients, to be like, hey, I'm with my family right now. Give me a few hours to wait for that or to get that done. And it might cause some confrontation. But if you have a very clearly communicated, keyword, clearly communicated boundaries, that is where you're going to have that. And then you will also see that it's not necessarily that, oh, hey, you were working 80 hours a week and your kids only saw you 3 hours, but how did your kids experience you during those 3 hours?
Yep.
Did you take the time to read them a book or story? Did you take the time to play with them at the park? Did you take the time to do that without looking at your phone, without getting distracted, without scrolling on your phone or anything else?
Yep.
That is the quality time that they're going to pay attention to. And what they're going to determine is a big paramount factor of whether they are feeling neglected or appreciated. It's the same thing with you. Like, same thing with your boss. And how much has it meant to you when you went out, like your boss went out of their way to make you feel appreciated, to make you feel cared for, to make you feel like a valued member? They might not get much time with you. They might not ever talk to you or acknowledge you a lot of the time because they're so busy with other things. But when they do spend time with you, how do they make you feel?
Yeah.
Did they actually give you that? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, they don't have to have some massive bonus or whatever. Like, that's always nice. Don't get me wrong. But it doesn't take much for a little bit of acknowledgement just to kind of like
go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same thing with if you have a partnership and everything, like, you don't want to neglect it and have your entire relationship fall apart and your whole family because you are so focused on everything else. And it's very easy, especially when you lose everything, you lose your job, you lose everything else. It's so easy to get stressed, to shut down, to go into your own bubble, cocoon, and then kind of give the middle finger to the world.
Yeah.
It's true. So the only way to avoid that is by, again, taking that quality time, making sure that you schedule and block out blocks of time for both your kids, your relationship, and everything else that is a priority, and making sure that you are focused and attentive during those times for whatever those priorities are.
Yep, those boundaries, absolutely.
Same thing with your business. Again, make sure, and this is something that was hard for a lot of the people that were in my life and that initially, when I was scaling my company, I had to block out 9 to 5. And I was like, hey, during this time, I need to be focused on work. Like, do not interrupt me, do not derail me, do not talk about plans for the weekend or whatever it may be. Like, I need to focus on work, because anytime I get distracted on that, then it's really hard to focus. And yes, there's some times where like my kids would get sent home sick, or they would have issues happen, or a medical emergency, or whatever it may be that would come up as a result that is not planned, that kind of derails you and like puts a wrench in the works, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is to be expected. It's not going to be all sunshine and roses. But if we hold accountability to ourselves and be like, hey, I still need to get work done, and I will do whatever I can within the best of my abilities to make sure I accomplish it, then you will still be able to gain success, and you'll still be able to gain traction. And that traction is what really matters. Even if it feels like you didn't accomplish much, it's still better than nothing. And it's that stepping stones. Even if you're only 1% better every day, like if you, for example, only you get a 1% return on your portfolio every single day, you'd be one of the best investors in the world. Even if you had occasional days or even a week where you got a 10% loss, 20% loss, or anything, if you still are consistently on average getting 1% gains per day, you'd still be the best investor and probably one of the richest men in the world very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same thing with your life.
So true. So true, man. This is then, yeah, pretty fascinating. It's a good reminder to us all that things can change overnight, literally, whether it be in your control or not. Things can change, and if you're prepared for it as much as possible, then you'll be able to carry that load just a little bit better. You're being a little bit more prepared for things to happen, to go sideways, and when they do, you know, it's that rainy day fund or whatnot. It might be a rainy day, but you're prepared for it, and you have the fund to cover it, that mental fund to move forward.
Well, and part of this, it's not, again, planning on your job to fire you at any moment, or not being paranoid with all this stuff. And it doesn't mean living such a prude lifestyle that you can't even go out to eat ever, right?
Sure.
Because that's a horrible quality of life. But it is with living very disciplined rules and like a clear budget within your means. Because if you could live on half your income, and just say, okay, 10% of that is going to be a charity, 10% of it is going to be fun, and the rest is going to be kind of a savings or my dream budget or whatever else, that gives you such a liberated freedom from stress, freedom from everything. Because if you literally had your entire company get shut down by a natural disaster or war, or the company goes belly up or whatever it may be, and you have that kind of a safety net, and you've only been living on X amount and living within your means and having some of that discipline, and still living a comfortable life that is fun and enjoyable, then who cares?
Yeah.
You're sitting there and be like, okay, yeah, it'll be fine. We're going to be good. I have like a year to find a new job or do what I want, or maybe, hey, this is the time I can finally pursue my passion. And that was just the boot to get you going.
That's exactly right. Right. And, you know, it sounds like you experienced that, you know, yourself. It was just kind of, you know,
I was not prepared in my circumstance. I was a broke teenager. I literally was paying $250 a month for essentially a closet that could barely fit. It was basically a walk-in closet with a futon. That's what I lived in for a very long time, and there was part of even longer of that I was homeless. So I was not spending a lot. I wasn't making a lot of money. You think that since I was doing sales and I was pulling in, close to 10 million a year, that my paycheck would reflect that? No, I was on average only making about 2,000 a month.
Mm.
Which even back then was not a lot. But I was doing that. I was affording everything, and then I still obviously had girls I was taking out and all that, and that's a very expensive
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
itself. The one splurge that I would have though is I would usually, so I would always usually have a fast food job on a top, or some kind of restaurant job on top of my other job, because the restaurant I could usually snack at or get food at, and that's basically what's
Covered your food bill.
subsidiary of my meals. That was
Yeah.
pretty much what I ate the entire time. So I wouldn't have
Wow.
groceries at home or anything else, and any of the food that they were going to throw away, that's what I ate.
That's amazing.
Wasn't the greatest life or anything, but I made do. I
You
was
made do and
scrappy.
you made it work, right? Yeah, you made do and made it work. Curious if I know you do like a lot for like fast food chains and stuff with your business now. Is that a result of that at all, or is that just kind of like coincidence that like, is it because you know that environment and things, or just curious?
Well, I mean, I've done work in hospitals, I've done work in fast food. I'm very methodical, and so I was really good, because when you're dealing with Fortune 500 companies, things are very much a template, and I had to learn. So if you are finding that you aren't really well accepted in your path or your career, and that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're in the wrong career or path. It just means maybe you're doing it wrong. Like if I'm dealing with small businesses, they very much are based on emotional, not logical decisions, which was a very big disconnect for me. So I didn't do well when it comes to working with small companies, just because they were so emotional and so price oriented, that it didn't matter what value I brought to the table. They didn't see it, right? They just saw the price tag and that's it. Whereas with businesses, if I could clearly show it, it's like, hey, here's the price, here's your return on investment, here's what I'm going to help you save. And does the math make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. I would like you to do 500 stores. Okay, great. That's the conversation with Fortune 500, because I could logically break it down. It made sense, and I could show an executable plan that I could deliver on. So that's why I did very, very well in those environments, because again, too, even in especially fast food chains, large fast food restaurants and chains, they are the same template day in and day out. It's not going to change. And there would always be one manager, well, we do things different here. Well, I don't really care, because how you've been doing things have been wrong. And we need to standardize this. So whether you go into this restaurant or 12 other restaurants, it's the exact same system, the same processes, the same procedures, everything else. And you know where to find things, you know where to expect things. And that is honestly more important necessarily than having all these like outliers and everything else. They're like, well, this is good in this run, but this is good in this one. And then let's just try to cross over and humble jumble. And it's good for research and development, but it's not good for consistency. And if you want consistency to figure out what you can improve, you need to standardize everything first and then make minor tweaks or improvements on different things as you go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of goes back to like the Lean Six Sigma method of DMAIC. It's define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. So it's not improve and control this improvement. It's like just seeing the current status of what it is, measuring that, define, measure, analyze.
That's the reality of why most people will still go to McDonald's, will still go to Burger King, will still go to, whatever restaurant you want to talk about, right? It's because they know that there's a predictable, or at least a relatively predictable experience, relatively predictable food quality, relatively predictable everything wherever they go, right? So it doesn't matter what state it is. If you recognize that and you know what that food tastes like, you're going to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that consistency that you know. So you guys, if you're listening to this, like Camron just dropped some real value and wisdom of his experience right here of it wasn't natural for you to kind of learn on, or to kind of like apply that emotional involvement based off of that. So that's something you had to learn and lean into, and then you figure out a process.
I had to learn that, but I
here's
had to learn where my skills were appreciated, where I was good at, where I could execute, and where I could get paid for it relatively well. And once I figured out that game plan and it clicked, that's where I gained success.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's huge. You guys go back and listen to that. Like, seriously, that's huge. So I appreciate you sharing that value and wisdom here.
All right. Well, thanks guys for joining us on this podcast again. If you did gain value, hopefully it was a bit of wise nuggets in there for you. So again, I'm not saying that, because it would be ignorant to say that you won't lose your ass at least at some point or make a bad call. We're all human. We're all imperfect. We all make mistakes. But the reality is, as we grow as humans and as we at least make a goal every day to improve somewhat in some tentative way, that's the way that we really grow as a people, as an individual, and get to the next level. That's the same way. Even if you're playing a stupid game like Mario, right? You don't gain levels by sitting in the same place or just doing the same things or throwing yourself in that. You just learn each step or each puzzle or each trap or each obstacle as they come up. You might not know what comes up ahead of you, but in order to save the princess from the dungeon, you've got to be willing to face the obstacles and overcome it, and be willing to die and try again. You're not going to get it first time in that.
Yeah,
ever.
Lessons from game. I love it. That's awesome. Applicable to everyone. If you can't apply what you just said there, you need to go back to listen to some other episodes. So no, that's applicable to everyone. That's great.
All right. Well, again, we appreciate you guys. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next podcast.
Peace.